Hopefully you guys aren't having too much trouble fitting in your seminars and whatnot. This is one of the leadership seminar series, so this will meet your requirement upon completion of a satisfactory paper for having at least one out of the leadership seminar series. You can do all three out of the leadership seminar series if you want, because my topics are great, so I would understand if you wanted to do that. So today I want to introduce to you Amber Toth. She is an outreach coordinator for the Center for Michigan, right? Okay. She previously worked as a grant programs consultant for the Michigan Nonprofit Association, completed 2 years of national service as an AmeriCorps Vista and Vista leader for Michigan Campus Compact. She's got her BA in psychology from Michigan State and a Master of Public Administration from Grand Valley State. The Center for Michigan is a nonprofit organization, and I'm going to let her tell you what they're all about. We also have Raven here, who is her scribe today, so welcome, Raven. Thank you. This is going to run about an hour and a half, pretty close, right? It's very interactive, so please do not sit there quietly. We want feedback. That's what this is all about. So she'll explain that to you, and with that, welcome, Amber.
Thanks so much, Professor Mercier. Like Professor Mercier said, my name is Amber Toth. I'm an outreach coordinator with an organization called the Center for Michigan. And before I get started with our conversation tonight about Michigan's pre-K through 12 education system, that's our topic of our discussion, I want to tell you a little bit about what the Center for Michigan is all about and what tonight is going to look like. So the Center for Michigan is a 501c3 nonprofit and nonpartisan organization. Other 501c3 nonprofits include a lot of probably the nonprofits that you think of, organizations like the American Red Cross, Boys and Girls Club, YMCA. Those are nonprofits that are just like us, public charities. And we're nonpartisan. And our goal as an organization is to find out what issues are most critical to Michigan residents, what ideas and issues are in your mind most critical to have this state continue to be a place where you want to live, work, go to school, and possibly get a job and raise a family. And we then take what we hear from Michigan residents when we engage them in a number of ways and then raise your ideas and concerns to our state leaders. So we do this in a couple of ways, this engagement work, but one of the ways that we do this quite frequently is through conversations just like this one. So we call these forums community conversations. We go all around the state asking Michigan residents just like yourselves what your ideas are about topics that are really important to our state. And we did an initial round of community conversations back in 2008, from 2008 to 2010. Over the course of those 2 years, we spoke to over 10,000 Michigan residents, just like you, in conversations just like this one. And we are asking, it was a state of the state sort of conversation, we were asking what issues in your mind are most critical to Michigan's recovery, economic recovery as a state. And of the top 10 concerns and issues that were brought up to us by those 10,000 participants, 3 of them were related to K through 12 education. So that's why we decided to talk about this year. Obviously, you are all students and have gone through the K through 12 education system. Possibly some of you are parents and have children in the K through 12 system currently. So I want to get your thoughts on how we can help students be as successful as possible and how we can improve our education system in the state. So your opinion truly does matter. So we're going to collect data in a couple of ways this evening. You all have that garage door looking device or calculator looking device in front of you. That's your tool of democracy tonight. We're going to do some voting with that clicker. And also, Raven will be taking notes like a mad woman. Her fingers will be flying across the keyboard as she's taking notes about what you have to say. We're compiling all this data for a couple of reasons. Basically, so that we know what's said across the state. We're talking to 5,000 people this year. We started in January, we're finishing at the end of October, and we've talked to about 4,300 people so far, so we're getting close to our end goal. You're part of a very select group of Michigan residents that are going to tell us about your ideas. And we're taking all of this data for the purpose of producing a final report of citizen recommendations. So we're going to look at what was said across the state, where we find trends and common ground, and what was shared across the state about your ideas for improving Michigan student success. We'll be putting those recommendations into a report that'll be shared back with all of you in January when it's ready. Also be shared with our legislators, our governor, and local and state leaders to let them know what you had to say about education and how you think they should shape education policy based on your recommendations. So that's how this is all going to work. It's really fast-paced, it's very interactive. After this introduction, I'm going to do very little talking. It'll mostly be turned over to you. The only ground rules I have is if you have a cell phone, I ask that you put it on vibrate, just because it's disruptive. And I just ask that everyone's respectful of what everyone else says, even if you don't necessarily agree. Education is a passionate topic, and I realize that. So that's all I have for you. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? All right, well, let's get going. So I've got 6 different topics I want to ask you about tonight, and we'll move quickly through all 6 of them. The first one is titled Grading Our Schools. So all of you are currently receiving grades, obviously, in your classes as we speak. I'm going to give you a chance to grade Michigan schools. So this is basically to get your initial impressions of how you think Michigan schools are performing. So if you've never used a clicker before, we're going to start with 2 clicker questions. I just want to give you a quick tutorial on how we do it. So that little device in front of you, I'm going to put several multiple choice questions up on the screen. You'll choose the number or letter that corresponds with your opinion. That's the only button you need to press on there. You don't have to press go or channel or anything else. You'll know it worked. The first time you press the button, it'll make a little green light will illuminate. If that doesn't happen, let me know. I've tested them all, but if that happens, I'll switch one out for you. And the only other thing to know is that you can only vote once per question, so choose wisely. Okay, so my first question for you. What letter grade would you give Michigan's statewide public education system? So if you were looking all across our state from preschool through 12th grade, what grade would you give it? You've got 5 options here. They range from A to E. So if you think they're really doing well as a state, you'd be more on the A level. If you think that our schools are not doing as well, you might be down more on the D to E level. All right, let's see what you had to say. So here our 2 highest vote getters were the B and C. So 38% of you think gave it a B, a good grade, maybe not the A level that we'd all be hoping for in a perfect world, but a good grade. 38% of you gave a statewide system a C, an average grade. And then 23% of you, almost a quarter of you, gave the statewide system a D, a below average grade, definitely not where we want to be. Secondly, what letter grade would you give your local public pre-K through 12 education system? So here I'll let you define local. I think a lot of times when people think of local, they think of the district where they live, or perhaps where they went to school. You can also think of it more regionally, if that's what makes the most sense to you. I'll let you decide what that means.
Amber, if we have international students who don't feel comfortable voting on that, can they just abstain from voting?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think lots of questions going forward will make more sense in kind of a global context if this particular question doesn't. All right, let's see what you had to say about this one. So here it looks like on the whole grades are a little bit better on average for our local grades. So 55% of you, just over half of you gave your local system a B, a good grade. Over a quarter of you gave it an A, an excellent grade, but then we do have 9% of you each at the D level, so below average, and 9% of you at the E level, a failing grade. So that's definitely not where we want to be. So I'm interested, especially to hear from those folks about how your ideas for making our school systems even better. So, why did you grade the way you did? I'm going to open it up here to you to discuss why you decided to vote the way you did, either statewide or locally. Anyone want to open our discussion tonight?
I'll open.
All right.
I'm sorry for being late.
No problem.
But I think I have been doing a lot of research on like schools these days, and noticing that a lot of the other cities are doing a lot of technological learning. And I find sometimes that teachers don't always have the best method to teach kids. And it'd be great if we could start integrating something that was a little bit more solid that we could depend on with teaching and metrics, measurement. And I'm not talking about college level so much, but I'm talking more so like high school, especially in the metroplex and some of the rural areas as well.
Okay. So teachers need to, you've noticed when you're going around doing this research that there are some methods that really aren't necessarily getting at.
It's not connecting with the kids, especially in middle school. One of the things that I'm really challenged in the middle school area is this particular math they have called connected math.
Okay.
And as a professional, we learn math one way, they'll learn math a different way. When you come home, you can't really tutor them because it's a totally different thing.
Sure.
And there's not enough, it's not enough routine for the kids to actually pick up how to use it, consistently apply it. And to me, that is like critical crux to need any issue to go to.
Sure, absolutely. Any other thoughts on why you voted the way you did, either at the kind of generally at the statewide level or locally? Been a lot of A votes, so I'm interested to know what maybe who those voters, where they're thinking about who's our A school out there, and why you think they're doing such a great job.
Well, Amber, one of the things that I think was interesting too is that you had no E's on the overall,
Right.
but you had at least one or two. I mean, it could have been many for 9%, but whatever, I can't do my math in my head. That gave their local system an E, and then you had no A's on the statewide average. So I'm wondering, who voted. I mean, you don't have to say how you voted or whatever, but what you think the reason was that those two numbers changed so much. I mean, I tend to think that maybe the media, especially in this area, we heard all this negative stuff about Detroit public school system, and they're doing so much to try and improve that school system, but the stigma over the last 5 years or so has been really, really bad. So I thought maybe that skewed the state, your idea of the state average, that for those people who gave their system an A or a B, but then they graded lower. So
Did that influence the way anyone was thinking about maybe the media perceptions of our statewide system?
Yeah, not necessarily the media perception. With having a little sister and little cousins and stuff in the Detroit public school systems, I kind of get firsthand of what they're going through.
Sure.
And what I can see from what they're telling me is that they're not having either the proper tools or the proper people to teach them what they need to know. For example, my sister goes to Renaissance High School. She had a substitute teacher maybe 15 days out of the semester so far, and it just started in August. And this is one of her core classes, math. I mean, really, how do you expect them to learn if you keep giving them substitute teachers who, when they come to class, they're not doing a thing?
Absolutely. I mean, we can all think back to when we had substitute teachers. A lot of times, those were movie days, or they were
blow up days.
Exactly. So I mean, from your firsthand experience as family members, people that there are big struggles that are happening in Detroit public schools, and it's the kids that are losing. When you've got situations like that. Any other thoughts, statewide, locally, or just general impressions of how you think Michigan schools are performing before we dive into your specific ideas about how we can make our schools better? We're going to do all sorts of talking tonight, so you might as well break the ice now, because we're going to go through 6 different topics. Any other thoughts?
I'd really like to hear from some other kids because, I hear Livonia is like an excellent school system. Farmington is known to be a very good school system. Bloomfield Hills, Country Day, those are like excellent school systems.
Clarkston area is supposed to be good.
Yeah,
Our area is good.
really good. So,
Yes.
Well, I've heard, this isn't from around here, but I know people that live northern, and they are saying that the teachers aren't connecting very well with the students. They aren't trying to understand what works best for them, and then with the push in technology being used, the connection is being lost even more. But I went to Heartland, and so I gave it a higher grade than the state overall, just because those teachers there, there's a lot more things being offered at the school I went to, and I don't think some of the other schools have as much being offered for students for them to try to figure out what they like.
So for you, at Heartland, you had a lot of resources and opportunities to find out what you might want to do after K through 12. When you say northern, do you think are you saying like northern, northern lower peninsula, or
above Saginaw?
Okay.
There's a lot of teachers I know there. So.
Okay. Interesting. Any other initial thoughts?
Not to put you guys on the spot, but I guess I'm going. Are you international students? You came from China? Korea. Okay, so if I'm really open and willing and interested to hear if we talk about anything that is dramatically in contrast to the way that you went through your primary education, I'd love to hear about it. I'm sure Amber would love to hear about it. If we're saying there are things that don't work so well around here that worked really well for you guys? That's the kind of input they're looking for, so.
Well, compared to Korea, I'd say like maybe. Well, I mean, I heard you talking about it, but I feel like there's a huge gap between ones that are doing really well and like let's say just Detroit downtown area, and they're not doing really well compared to other schools like Huntington Hills or Southfield Hills. And I feel like that gap is a lot smaller in Asian countries.
Okay.
Like, so as an average, I mean, they're all, well, if the connection's bad, I mean, almost like every high school or schools are bad usually.
Okay.
There's not really huge difference, actually.
Sure. So you've noticed here in Michigan there can be really big gaps in the
Right.
way that we're quality of education students are receiving, and you don't see that so much.
Right. I mean, I think it's really related to the financial situation too.
Sure.
It's one of the poorest like state in this nation here, so that might actually answer.
Absolutely. So funding has a huge role in that. That's something I'm going to ask about tonight, so I'm glad you raised that point. It's something I want to ask you about, how we invest in education in our state. So these are really great points. And I'm gonna move us into our second discussion, because the following discussions are more specific about ideas for perhaps helping students be more successful. And I feel like you guys will have a lot to say about these things, because they'll either match up with your experiences or you'll say that doesn't make any sense to me at all. So I'm interested to hear your feedback. So our second discussion focuses around teacher and school leader quality, which we've actually touched on a little bit already in a couple of your comments, the connection between students and teachers. We know probably from many of our own experiences, and the research would suggest that having high quality teachers and school leaders can have a really big impact on a student's success in K-12. So there are a couple of ideas related to teacher and school leader quality that I'd like to get your feedback on, whether you think these things would really help students learn or maybe not. So there are three things I want to ask about particularly in this section. They're outlined on pages 7, 8, and 9 of that guide with the apple on the cover. So in there, on each of these topics, there's a little synopsis in each and some pros and cons. And that guide is for you to keep. And I know text there, so you can either look it over now as a resource for yourself or take it with you and check it out later. I'll give you a quick snapshot of some of the content that's in there for each of these. So the first thing I want to get your impressions of is improving teacher preparation. So those who are in favor of this idea sometimes say that essentially we need to make it more difficult to become an educator, or change the way we prepare our teachers to become teachers at the college and university level. So I want to get your thoughts on that. So some say, we need to change the curriculum that college students are learning. Maybe we need to get them more in the classroom experiences while they're at the college level. I want to get your thoughts on these things, whether you think those would really help our students be more successful or maybe not. Secondly, providing stronger support for educators is another idea that was suggested to us. Obviously, the word support can mean many things here, and I'd be interested to know if you think that supporting educators is really important, which forms of support you think are most important. Some of the things suggested to us included having coaching and mentoring programs, particularly for those who are new to their position as either an educator or an administrator in the school building. Also having ongoing professional development that's really linked to an educator's performance evaluation, so they are able to use professional development to build upon areas where they may not be as strong, and also continue to stay strong in areas where they have strengths. The third option I want to get your thoughts on is holding educators more accountable. So accountability is a very hot topic in education policy right now, and some are suggesting that essentially we need to hold educators more accountable for their student success. So I want to get your thoughts on that, whether you think that's something that's important or if it's something that you think we're already doing a good job of. There have been some changes recently around the tenure system, which rewards teachers. In the past had rewarded educators, both teachers and administrators, for how long they had been serving as a teacher and educator. There's been some changes in the law, so there's now not as much reward for longevity. They're trying to link accountability more to student performance. I want to get your thoughts on whether you think those are good changes, not so much, and if you think more accountability is necessary, what sorts of accountability measures you'd like to see. So these are the three things I'm going to ask you about specifically with your clickers, but I also know there are probably many ideas about teacher and school leader quality that aren't up here, and I'd love to hear those from you as well. So I'm going to start with 3 clicker questions, then open it up for discussion. So my first question for you In terms of improving student learning outcomes, how important is it to improve teacher preparation for entry into education professions? You've got 5 options here. They range from option 1, which is irrelevant, all the way down to 5, which is crucial. So if you think it's important for us to improve the way we prepare teachers, you might be down more on the 4 to 5 end. If you don't think it's very important, you'd be more at the 1 to 2 end. Okay, let's see what you had to say about teacher preparation. So here, almost half of you say this is important. We've got almost a quarter of you that say it's crucial. Another almost a quarter of you say it's somewhat important. We have 8% of you that say it's not very important, but on the whole, 92% of you say this is an important concept to you. Secondly, same format as before. In terms of improving student learning outcomes, how important is it to provide stronger support for educators? Same 5 options ranging from irrelevant to crucial. Any last-second voters out there? All right. So 62% of you say this is important. That's our highest vote getter. And again, 92% of you say this is at least somewhat important to you. And then third, in terms of improving student learning outcomes, how important is it to hold educators more accountable? So here everyone says this is at least somewhat important. We've got the majority of you saying somewhat important or important, but quite a few of you say crucial as well. So let's talk about these things. I know that those questions are kind of big and vague. Does anyone want to describe what they meant by their vote, maybe define it a little bit, or bring up something? Yes, sir.
When I was in high school, the problem I saw wasn't with the teachers. The teachers, they were very passionate. They knew about the topic, and they wanted to help the kids learn. I know that they had everything they need. They won't like any of that. But the problem was the kids don't have an interest in it. For math, they don't want to learn. They've been like that since elementary school. Science, same way. They just don't want to learn it. There's no interest or passion in it. And whether or not we need to spark an interest in it, I think a lot of things could be helped if we increase the choice the students have in their classes. I know when they're younger, they don't necessarily they don't know what they want to do for a living, so it's very hard to pick classes to prepare them for college. But even aside from that, if they don't have an interest in learning it, they're not going to learn it no matter how hard you try and teach them. They're just not going to do it. And even beyond that, there's no one-step way to teach kids. I just like a lecture. You sit there and talk. I like that. That's good for me. But that's not good for the majority of the students. And when you try to teach a group of 30 kids one way, people are going to fall through the cracks. Either overachieving students are going to be held back, or underachieving students are going to be forgotten because you teach to the middle. You can try and help the 20 kids that can be pushed the furthest, where the 5 overachievers, they just languish, they're bored, they do nothing. And the 5 underachievers, they hate the class, they don't go anywhere. And it's just, we just can't teach that many kids in the same way. It doesn't really work, I think.
Okay, absolutely. So would you, if it were up to you, would you advocate for smaller class sizes or maybe prepare teachers to teach to different learning styles or both?
One small class will help, and segregate the classes based on the style of learning the student likes.
Okay.
If such as possible. I realize resources are limited, but that would be the best outcome.
Absolutely. So maybe have a class, a science section that's just for visual learners, for example. Divide things up
Or
that way.
allow, for some students, I've seen that it would be best for them to take the fast track through high school. If they take all 8, 10 years, whatever the number was, to go through it, that may not be maximizing their potential, whereas if they were given all the resources they need, they could get through it in 6 years.
Sure.
Even with some break. So it would just be helpful to teach more to each individual student.
Absolutely. Kind of focus on what that student's abilities and needs are and adjust accordingly. Very good. Any other thoughts on any of these ideas related to teacher and school leader quality? Or quite a few, a lot of you thought that the ideas of improving teacher preparation, support, and accountability were good. Does anyone want to talk about why they thought so?
With teacher preparation, a student can sometimes feel when a teacher is like unprepared. So then they'll have like a kind of laid back attitude towards everything, like, okay, they don't know what they're really doing or how they're going to approach it, so let me just chill out or something like that. So I think if the teacher is better prepared, it can help the system go a lot better, like have a lesson plan and have it approved by somebody. And like he was saying, like the different teaching methods, like one day you can lecture, the next day you can do like an experiment or something like that. Incorporate variety into your teaching methods.
Absolutely.
And you can find a better way to connect with the students if you incorporate a different variety. That way each person will learn from another way. That way we can all be on the same page.
Absolutely. Each student can kind of take what works best for them when there's that variety. And I think you're right. I mean, students can see right through a teacher who's not prepared for what they're going to do. So I think. Saw your hand there.
He was saying his high school experience, most of his students were very enthusiastic to teach. My experience, some of my teachers in high school weren't, and I think that's because they knew they weren't being held accountable for very much. And I think there was more pressure put on them. They would step it up, like they were there just because they were a teacher. They needed to get paid. They just had to get through the day. You know, get people to maybe learn a little bit. I think if there's more pressure on them, they'd step it up. They'd try different ways to get the kids involved, to get them to learn the subject. So I think that's something that.
So you would look at more accountability to make sure that everyone stays passionate. How would you, if it were up to you, how would you do that? Do you have any ideas?
You can sense it too, can't you? I mean, haven't we all had teachers?
Doesn't care.
Right.
You don't care. Why should I care?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you had, did you have follow-up?
I can come back.
Okay. I'll come right back, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say that throughout my whole life, I've had teachers that have been fantastic and teachers that have been really poor. I feel like all of these can be somewhat important, but none of them can be very important just because there are teachers out there who are doing a fantastic job with what they have. It's not like we absolutely need it, but maybe it's the poor teachers shouldn't be there or aren't putting in effort that they should be. And as you just said, holding them more accountable, that only works to a point because, as he said earlier, you're always going to have students that are just uninterested or don't want to learn, who aren't going to put in the effort, and you can't really blame a teacher for that. For kids who just refuse to do the work, they can't be held responsible for that.
There's some accountability that's within the student as well, so it could be somewhat unfair to hold the teacher accountable.
Yeah, it's got to be a two-way street.
What about, I think you're going to come to this later too, but what about accountability at home? I have a friend who's a school teacher in the Pontiac school system. She teaches kindergarten, and she has many, many, many 4-year-olds. They don't have to be 5 until I think it's December 1st, who have never been to preschool, who have never had any, work at home with colors and letters, and it holds, like you said, it holds back the class to get these kids started. So, how much do we expect from home? And I know we're going to get into that later.
We are, but does anyone have any comments about that?
Well, there is a disconnect at home. I would even venture to say from parents who are struggling to maintain healthy families due to economics. So we're talking about low income, even to low middle income.
Sure.
That could be a problem.
Absolutely.
And because if a single mother is in control of that home and she's a single mother, she's struggling to manage finances, and so her attention is on a number of things, not just strictly my kids' education at the age of 2, 3, or 4.
Right.
You know,
Putting them through preschool, which is expensive.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that's an identifiable issue. But I think for the student-teacher relationship, I think one way to weed out students, or at least identify students and teachers who are either not interested for the student or for the teacher, is to do some type of survey or to have some kind of tool, some measuring tool that helps students identify teachers who are not as interested or not connected. At least survey them at certain points just so that a principal or administrator can say, okay, this is not just 5 students. Over the course of a year, 95% of the students say that you don't seem to be so interested. We have that in job evaluations in the corporate world. Why not implement a metric like that?
Absolutely.
At a
So
certain level?
doing some kind of random, would you have them be anonymous or would you have them attached to someone's identity? And
That's
you
a
don't
very.
know.
I know, but just to follow, the problem is, if you have a majority, you don't need a name,
Right.
right? But if you have a minority, you give out a name, you may create a problem in the relationship between the student and teacher. So if that information is given, it needs to be anonymous to the teacher, but maybe identifiable by the principal. But that would be that's a discretionary issue.
Absolutely. So it's a really interesting thought. Why don't we ask students and why don't we ask the teachers' peers, and then give them an opportunity to give some feedback, because then you could look for trends, not just, outliers who may have an individual issue.
Exactly. I would even say that for teachers dealing with parents, from a teacher's perspective, how connected does this parent seem, especially in the lower grades? How connected does this parent seem to the student's education? How invested are they? Are they disconnected? Or are they just using this as a babysitting service? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Just about that.
I want to come with you right to your comment. I just don't want to forget that you had something.
I was just going to play on her comment about holding the teachers more accountable. I feel like if we hold the teachers more accountable, we should give them more incentives. Because teachers are kind of underpaid for the job they do. I mean, go 8 hours with a whole bunch of screaming kids. You get tired. I mean, it's kind of draining. I know you pick this profession and everything, but sometimes it feels good just to know that you're okay. I think if I'm teaching math and all of my students are achieving a certain level, I should be rewarded for that.
Sure. I mean,
something that I'm doing it right.
Absolutely.
So,
there are ways of holding people accountable in a positive way, too.
Exactly.
Having some incentives. Yes, sir.
I was going to add something about my experience in Korea. She was talking about parents are lacking interest in children's education, but in Korea, I feel like there's this opposite.
Okay.
The parents are having too much enthusiasm. They want their kids to, overeducate. Even though children doesn't want to become doctors, they force them to study to go to med school because for their future.
Sure.
And I feel like that's the problem. And to do that, parents don't they only have, most of Korean family has only a child, so they can support the child's education. Because, you guys have been saying, the fee or the paying for the education is expensive, and they only focus on one child and to be successful.
So there can be, it's kind of a double-edged sword in some way. I mean, we've talked about, a lack of family involvement can be a problem, but there can be issues with having too much family involvement too. So we got to find a balance. Any other thoughts on this?
So she's taking a survey of the students. From what I've seen here, half the kids, they don't care about the survey. They just fill in all A, they don't even do it. And if you make it anonymous, there's no way to fight that.
Sure.
But obviously you can't have the teacher do it, but perhaps have a dedicated position in the school that gives the surveys to each student. They know the name. If they find out you didn't take it, they'll come after you.
Sure.
Make sure you take it, try and get your honest feedback, and of course incorporate the feedback from the other faculty. And if they find that the teacher is really not caring and interested, give them a warning. But if the behavior keeps up, it needs to be easy to fire a teacher.
Sure.
When I was in high school, I noticed there was this teacher who consistently didn't care. They gave out answers to the tests, the final exams, every semester. And the school district, all they could do was send her to a different school. They couldn't fire her because of the union and the contract they had. And that obviously has to be dealt with if the teacher truly is not doing her job.
Sure.
Sure.
Because I mean, the ultimate goal of education is that each student gets a great and equal learning opportunity as everyone else. And it sounds like, if you have that teacher, that's not going to be the case. So, these are really great points. I'm going to move us on to our third discussion topic, but I know issues of teacher and school leader quality will definitely be related to many of the things we'll talk about yet tonight. But I do want to make sure to get your input about all of the different topics that I want to ask you about tonight. So, our third discussion is creatively titled More Options for Improved Student Learning. They don't quite fit under a neat title as well as the teacher and school leader quality options. But again, these are things that were mentioned to us when we went out and were wanting to put together this guide to ask you about certain ideas and issues that are out there being talked about by education groups and business groups and by education policy folks. And so what we heard most frequently we wanted to put together and ask you about. So the 5 options I want to ask you about in this particular section are outlined on pages 10 through 14 of your issue guide. But again, I'll give you a quick snapshot of each one. We're going to switch gears in this section and actually start with open conversation and then do a quicker vote on each one. The first option I want to get your thoughts on is expanding early childhood and preschool programs. So we've touched on this a little bit so far this evening already. Those who are in favor of expanding these programs will point to the fact that neurological evidence makes it very clear that a child's brain begins developing long before age 5 when most kids enter kindergarten. Brain development begins almost immediately after birth. So those who are in favor of this say, if we had more early childhood educational experiences that was accessible to all families, there would be more children entering kindergarten ready to learn and being ready for that setting. I want to get your thoughts on that. Whether you think that would improve student learning or not. Second idea I want to get your thoughts on is changing the school calendar. So on the whole, Michigan has fewer days of instruction than some other states, far fewer days of instruction than some other countries. Particularly for our Korean students here, I'd be interested to know, because I know on average, South Korea has about 220 days in your school calendar. We have about 170 here in Michigan. I want to get your thoughts on whether you think changing the school calendar would improve student learning, and if you think so, what you'd want that change to look like. Third, reducing class sizes. So Michigan's ratio of students to instructor is one of the highest in the country. I want to get your thoughts on whether you think bringing those class sizes down would help students learn, and again, if so, what you'd want those class sizes to look like. Fourth, increasing school choice. So this has been an option that's really been debated hotly at the legislative level here in our state over the last couple of years. I want to get your thoughts on whether you think having more choices for where a student goes to school can help improve student learning. There's been a lot of talk recently about charter schools. I'm sure you've seen on the news or read in the newspaper. There's been lots of talk about schools of choice as well. So I want to get your thoughts on whether you think increased school choice can help improve student learning, and if so, which school choices you think are best. And then fifth, expanding online learning. This has been another hot topic lately in the state of Michigan, and particularly if you've had online learning experiences, I'd love to hear from you about this. I know this is, I think, an online class, so I'd be interested to know what you think of online learning and whether you think it works at the K-12 level, and if so, kind of what sort of online learning you think would be most effective. So these are the 5 options I want to ask you about, but again, if there's not something that's not up here that should be, I want you to throw that option out as well. So I'll open it to you. Does anyone want to take on one or more of these?
You're going to poll us, right?
I'm actually going to start with conversation this time and do polls. I'm switching up the game a little bit.
Just for the online learning, I'm curious as to how you guys feel about this class. This is the first time I've ever taught online, and I don't like it. Yeah. I like being in the classroom. I mean, it's like, well, wow, hey, you're Professor Mercier. There's not as much interaction, and I'm hearing the same thing from you guys. Does anybody really like it? You don't care either way. Because you're the lecture guy, right? So you don't need the interaction.
Okay, so for you it works. I saw a couple of other hands.
For this class, I think it works. I've taken online math before, and it doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
And I think if I had online classes in high school, like in college, I'm paying for it, so I feel more of an obligation to make sure I do good in those classes. If I took online classes in high school, it would not be good. I would not be learning.
Sure. So there's a maturity level that has to come along with online learning that may or may not be.
Because you're pushing yourself. You don't have someone there so much to push you or help you.
Whichever, I see both of your hands, whichever you'd like to speak first.
The
Well, I hate online classes as well. I mean, I think there's like, I think it's, I don't know, like you have to send us like 1,000 emails a day just to say whatever you need to say.
I'm sorry.
You know, you could probably say it in 5 minutes in real life, but like you
You're
need
right.
just, you know what I mean?
Clarify.
And then personally, I have a lot going on, and I completely forget about it.
Sure.
And so like, I need to make sure I fit this into my schedule, and like every day to day, I forget about it, and I have to constantly remind myself that I actually have another course online. So,
And do you think at the high school level that it would have worked for you?
no.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I take online classes only because I have to work so much.
Sure.
So it's good for that point. But other than that, like in general, just all online classes are pretty rough. They're
Okay.
usually pretty bad.
Okay.
Either, you know, the instructor and student communication isn't all the way there, or there's just general problems with it, and the learning quality is never as good. But I do think that K-12 should be using online resources. Like a teacher can upload, you know, the presentations they went through or notes online to the student afterwards, and they can keep track of the homework and maybe even submit it online. It might be easier for them that way. I feel like it's a way of moving forward.
Definitely. So for you, online there can be tools online and maybe
Definitely.
more like a blended sort of option, but for you, like fully online courses just don't seem to help you learn as well as you might in person.
Yes, I feel like that's like the best option is for in-class classes to start using online resources.
Okay. Yes.
My high school started hybrid learning classes, like
Okay.
a year after we left, where the student would go to class like 4 days of the week they'd have it with the teacher, and then like the 5th day would be online. And the days when they were online, the students would just like leave and go home and not learn anything. So for like high school, it's not worth it. And I took an online, it was like a partially online class for math. And so we go like Monday and Wednesday we were in class, and then Fridays were always like online lectures.
Okay.
And everybody would just like turn their computer on and leave the room and not learn anything.
Okay. So there's not a lot of oversight that sometimes comes along with that.
Especially with like the online, it was just like reiterating everything that was taught in class already, so there was no point to be patient.
Sure. Wasn't really adding anything to your experience.
Well, I personally could see my high schooler getting all his buddies together in a room, and they'd all bring their laptops, and they'd all, load them up, and then they'd compare answers, and, it would be just a fun hangout day.
Sure.
So.
And that's something I've actually heard from some high school students, that that's kind of how they do online learning. So,
I was listening to a report today that said kids are actually, young kids, actually learn a lot through technology, especially iPads and touch, anything that's touch related, which is probably why we love Sesame Street when we were kids. We can learn all our ABCs and 1, 2, 3s and colors too, right?
Sure.
So I think maybe the context is where does it benefit a kid most? What age range would it benefit the kid most to be online? And if the online sessions are interactive enough, I think a 5-year-old would love to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 apples, but it may not, it may be, in my context or my kid's context, it may not be the best. But, maybe those preschool areas, would be great for online learning, especially if they're at home and instead of the parents being disconnected and the kids coming to preschool the first day of class come prepared, they could actually come prepared. If the parent had a computer at home, they could connect that way and go through those kind of sessions with their kids.
definitely. So then paying attention to, what research shows and what kids are showing interest, how it works best to actually help them learn, and then use it in those areas.
Because they can speed through ABC 1, 2, 3, but by the time you get to geometry and algebra 2, you need it.
Definitely.
Teach me, right?
I know I did.
It seems to me that we're going about education in K-12 in the wrong sort of way. We try to teach chemistry and American literature from the 1800s and physics and calculus. And to be honest, a lot of times you don't necessarily need any of those. Math, arithmetic, addition, how to read, how to write. Yeah, those are all basic skills you need. But most of us in high school have noticed a lot of kids, they just don't have a passion in that field. They have no desire to know the intricate workings of chemistry or physics.
Sure.
And I just think it's a complete waste to teach it to them.
Me too.
It's the kids they're not passionate about it. They cheat off of other kids. They get by with a D. They think this is hilarious, and that's it. They go on to the next grade and they don't remember anything when they're an adult. And it just seems to be such a waste to teach kids that. It's just we need to teach stuff that the kids want. I realize there's a problem, like I said earlier, the kids don't know what they want to do for a living. And so maybe we don't need to worry so much about education from 7 to 10 years old. I realize when you're younger, it's the best time to learn, so get your ABCs, get the basic math down then. But maybe wait a little bit to start till the kids find out what they want to do with their life. Of course, if you just leave around, oh, they're not going to do anything, so keep the parents involved. Help them just enjoy life for the first year. Find out what they love. If they love to weld, if they want to go with U.S. Steel, they want to work in business or technology. Help them find out what they want to do. And once they find out, then they can go on to a sort of different type of college where they then learn that skill.
Sure.
Not necessarily an apprentice type program, but just more programs that doesn't waste our time on classes we don't remember.
Okay.
Because everyone I've talked to that I graduated with, they don't remember chemistry or physics or calculus or anything.
Sure, because maybe they're not using it at
Right,
this point.
they're not using it.
I say
And,
that to my kids all the time.
and some kids do use it. I use calculus in the work I do on my own.
Sure.
So it's good for me. But for 95% of the other kids, they don't use it.
Right, and
a waste
I
of
know earlier
time.
you mentioned maybe having some choice in that, and it seems as though we're actually kind of moving in the other direction right now, and we just implemented this Common Core standard where every student, has to have the same basics throughout. So if you would advocate for actually going in the other direction and having more choice based on what you might want to do.
Can I? Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead. Well, just to tag what he said, I say this to my kids all the time because when you have kids that are wired for life sciences, then maybe that's their trajectory, maybe that's their path, and it's great to coach that along. But like my daughter is not a life science girl, so she's never going to use it. I've never used it. So if she's graphic arts, put her on a track that's going to cultivate that skill set.
Sure.
And it doesn't have to start. I mean, you can start younger. You can put kids on tracks and let them experiment. But more than anything, I just like to reverberate what he said. It is really a waste of money that everybody has physics because everybody doesn't use physics. That's not even the way our corporate world is set. So I think we need to scan kids early, survey kids early to figure out how are they wired, what are the things they connect to that you gravitate toward, and then try to build 2 tracks, life sciences and arts and sciences or something like that, and do it that way.
Okay.
I understand the point that you're making, but I disagree because a lot of people, even once they're in college, they still don't really know what they want to do. And having all these different courses, although a lot of students might not like them, it does open up their options and does expose them to something that they haven't been exposed to before. And who knows, they might pick up on this and go, wow, I'm interested in this. And that might set the track for them. I know plenty of people who go years in college who are just kind of on a path just because. Like, they're still not even interested in it, but they're just
I'm
going.
not sure exactly what they haven't decided yet. So kind of 2 different perspectives here on
Yeah,
this.
so
There's because some say, it could open your eyes to something and track, it could be limiting to have a track, but others say, why waste their time? And, so 2 very different perspectives and equal, you guys both have
I
great
think you
points.
can't really ask, a middle school, young high school student, like, oh, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? Like,
Sure.
you're a young kid still. Like, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? They don't know.
Be a
Well,
Detroit
can I-
Lion or, tiger. That's what mine's going to be.
I want to give this young lady a chance to speak because you've had your hand up patiently for a while.
I kind of wanted to change his. I agree with him definitely because being in different settings open your eyes to new horizons. But explaining early childhood, I'm kind of on the fence with that because I feel like you need those first beginning years with your parents so they can build a foundation. They can, you can actually do things with your kids from. I have a 7-year-old.
Okay.
And before he went to school, he knew everything he was doing in kindergarten already because we did it at home.
Sure.
We got that basis. He developed his personality. But with the online learning at such a young age, I'm learning that his cognitive abilities are kind of decreasing, like his handwriting. It could be way better, but because of texting and technology, he's always on a computer. He can type better than he can write.
Sure.
I mean, he can read. That's a given, but I'm seeing his handwriting, actually. He writes terrible at 7 years old, which is kind of my fault, but we're getting better with it, but it's so easy to just hop on a computer and just type up something that you're losing some of your basic foundations.
Definitely. So for you, you wish there could be some benefit to early childhood years, but you're seeing that, people need some time with their families
With
too.
technology so in our area now, it's like he needs technology.
Sure.
So I don't want to deprive you of technology.
Right.
But I want you to learn how to write. I want you to learn how to use a computer also.
Sure.
So it's kind of like I'm on the
It's a
fence.
balance. Definitely. Very good. Yeah.
I do agree with the youth actually too, that a lot of times kids don't know what they want to do. And I don't think what we need to do is stick them in a class 9 to 5 and just talk to them. I think it'd be better if we have more exploratory options. Not mandate you have to learn chemistry, physics, and take a test on it, but let them experiment with it. Do labs, do stuff with your hands to actually get involved with chemistry and physics. And if the kid truly does not want to take the class, don't make them do it. Just leave it open to them to decide with input from the parents, of course. And just let them enjoy the learning experience for the first few years, and then whenever they find out what they want to do, if it's at 10 or 20, then they can make the choice to start taking more refined classes towards their degree.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I do agree with him, but sometimes too many choices are not really meaning much. Like it almost gives you more of hesitation rather than like, okay, this is a clear, there's a choice. It's not like 5 options there. So if that's the choice is too broad, it would be actually rather harder for a student because they haven't actually built up their, they haven't identified their, like what they want to do, and then but all that. It's a pretty big and then huge step for them. So maybe up to a certain point, they should keep maybe less choice, like that way, and then maybe we gotta study more or research more on when is a good time for them, and then after that point, they can just let people choose.
Okay. So maybe start with some kind of basics and then open
Right.
it up to choices.
Right.
So a couple, and I'll take these last 2 comments, and I'm going to do a quick vote on each of these. I'll start here, and then I'll come to you.
I agree with both. I understand that the core classes are important, and if you don't know, then you aren't going to know unless you try those things. So if the child isn't sure, they don't have a passion yet, they can stay in those core classes. They can try new things, the math, the physics, the calculus. But they're saying if they know they have the passion, why take those classes? When I was in high school, I was given the opportunity to stay at my high school for 3 hours out of the day, out of the 6.
Mm-hmm.
I had to take those core classes. I had to take the math, the English. But then I was able to leave the school and go to what they call the share time, which was graphic design, because I knew that's what I wanted. So if there's more opportunities like that, like when the student knows, they can take those classes. But then there's still a couple of the math that they have to know later in college. It might be useful.
Definitely. So kind of combining these 2 concepts, like making sure that everyone has the basics, but also giving them the student freedom once they know what they want to do to explore those areas.
First, I definitely agree with that point. And I mean, in high school, I took plenty of elective classes, and that definitely helped put me on track with what I'm doing. But going back to what you said, I see that as a good idea, but in the end, I feel like that's going to be a very large waste of both time and resources, saying, have them try out a little of this and a little of this and a little of this before taking the class. It's like, when would that actually happen? When would that get done? And on top of it, in these basic physics and chemistry classes, there are labs and experiments. There are hands-on projects with kids to get involved.
Okay. So you could see some limitations as far as funding around that, resource allocation.
Can I just
Yeah.
the problem is at the high school level, once somebody gives you chemistry, I don't know about every other high school, but at ours, it's an all-year class. So a student is committed to that all year. Or physics, a student is committed to all year. So as a parent, I have a problem with that. Because if I know my daughter is not wired or my son is not wired for physics, I really don't want to waste my money that way. I wish I had a choice, and I don't. And I'm not grievously offended, but at a certain point, if I can voice an opinion, a different opinion, then I would. Because if your kid is doing life science at home, then of course that all of those are wonderful. But if your kid is not doing that at home, they're doing video. I mean, they're doing multimedia. They're doing, just creating all kinds of things. Even some computer programming at a young age, because there are computer programs out there where you can program at a young age. If you know your kid is working in that, then I would like for him and her to have an option.
Sure.
Just to point on some of the things that are up there, increase school I would love to see classes reduced to at least 20. For school choice, I think it would be great, but sometimes it's a waste of money. Although you get a school choice voucher, if I'm in Detroit, if I don't have a car to take my kid back and forth to Bloomfield or Birmingham or wherever, then it's
not
really
a choice.
It's not really a choice, right? So, and unless we're going to add tax dollars for busing, it really makes no sense because that's. So I find that school choice is only really a good option when you're in a bordering city. Like I'm in Southfield, but I send my kids to Crosshair. That's different. But if it's Detroit to Bloomfield, Birmingham, that doesn't seem to be a feasible option.
Okay.
And to change the school calendar, I would like some exploration classes to be done over the summertime when kids are doing absolutely nothing.
These are good points. So I do want to, because I'm glad you raised some of those, because we didn't get to some of these as much as others. So I do want to do a quick clicker vote about each of these. One last second, we'll get here. All right. So we're a little bit split on this one. So it looks like more of you say this is important than not important. We've got our largest percentage of you say it's important at 42%. But we do have 33% of you, a third of you say it's not very important or irrelevant. But we got the other 2/3 of you saying it's got some importance to you to expand these programs. Secondly, in terms of improving student learning outcomes, how important is it to change the school calendar? Let's see what you said about the school calendar. So a third of you say it's somewhat important to change the school calendar. Maybe not your highest priority, but it has some importance to you. Next, we've got a quarter of you that say it's irrelevant. So some of you are on this end of the scale. 17% of you each said it's important and not very important. So we've got some opposing viewpoints there. 8% of you say it's crucial. So a few more of you, again, on the important side, but still quite a few of you that say not so important. Split on that one a little bit as a group. Third, in terms of improving student learning outcomes, how important is it to reduce class sizes? So most of you here think this is important or crucial. We've got 16% of you that say it's not so important, but a lot of you on the important side. Fourth, in terms of improving student learning outcomes, how important is it to increase school choice? Maybe just a couple more seconds to vote. If you're not sure if your vote counted, you kind of always press your button more than once because it will only count your vote once. All right, let's see what you said about school choice. Wow, we are very split on this. Almost the exact same number of you say it's irrelevant and not very important as say somewhat important or important. We do have 9% of you though that say crucial, so just a few more. Probably one more person thinks it's important but not important, so we're almost split 50-50 on this. Then fifth, in terms of improving student learning outcomes, how important is it to expand online learning? Any last second voters out there? So here more than half of you say this is either irrelevant or not very important. We've got a few of you on the, looks like we've got 36% of you say it's either somewhat important or important to you. The others of you say it's not so important. And then my last question in this section. So we've talked about 8 things, at least a little bit so far this evening, or at least mentioned a couple of 8 different options. I want to get your thoughts on which option we've discussed today has the highest potential to improve student learning. So if you were to prioritize one of these above the others, which one would it be? And you can vote with your clickers on this. You've got options 1 through 8. I know, I just feel like a jerk when I ask this question. Because I change my mind constantly about which one I would vote for. Two more not voted. Looks like we're missing a couple voters.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Has there been any research done? I don't
There's in that issue guide. There's some footnotes there that highlight some different studies about each of them. Feel free to check those out, and if you find that you have questions, you can.
I just know they're industry kind of.
There is some research done on some of them in particular. Yeah. Let's see what you had to say about these. Wow, we've got 3 tied as the most popular vote getters. So a quarter of you said improving teacher preparation has the highest potential to improve student learning. Another quarter of you said holding educators more accountable. The third quarter of you says reducing class sizes has the highest potential. And the last quarter of you is split at 17% say providing stronger support for educators. The other remaining 8% say expanding online learning. So that's where your votes. Very interesting. So our fourth discussion, after this we have just one more big discussion and a final question, so hang on to me. So our fourth discussion centers around some approaches that aren't necessarily centered within the school. We've talked a lot about school-focused ideas, but I want to get your thoughts here about family involvement in a student's learning, as well as community group and business group involvement in a student's learning. Let's start with 2 clicker questions, or just yes or no, and then open it up for discussion. The first question for you. Is there anything more that schools should do to encourage greater family involvement to improve student success? If you think yes, vote 1. If you think no, vote 2. % of you say yes, 8% say no. Secondly, is there anything more that community groups or business groups should do to improve student success? And here, community groups would include volunteer groups, faith-based groups, nonprofit groups, and business groups would be for-profit entities in a community. So again, 92% of you say yes here, 8% say no. So the yes or no part's the easy part. Here's the harder part. How do we do this? So how do we get families involved? How do we get communities and business groups involved in student success? If you think this is important, or if you say no, I'd be interested to hear your perspective as well. Yeah.
I think teachers should try and meet all their students' parents. I understand there's parent-teacher conferences, but then if parents don't show up, either get in contact with them through email or in some form or another and talk about their student, talk about how they interact at home, and if it seems like the family maybe doesn't do too much and the student could use more, maybe just try and encourage the parents to be like, hey, push your kid a little bit more, maybe try and make this fun for them.
Absolutely. So, encouraging having our teachers reach out to parents, even if they aren't able to come to student-teacher conferences, making sure they make that connection and form a relationship at least at some level. Yeah.
At my middle school, we had a mentorship program. So I think it was like a few times a month you'd meet with some professionals in the field that you were interested in. And we would go on field trips and we would go to their place of business and they would just tell us a little bit about like what they were doing. And so like that's where I had an architecture mentorship there, and I still like know the people that I was with and like the professionals in the area. And so that just helped me out a lot. That helped me decide what I wanted to do. And so that made it.
That's very cool. And if you don't mind me asking, which school district?
Birmingham schools.
I've noticed a lot of times parents, they do truly care about their students' performance, but a lot of times when the parents, for one reason or another, they just don't care. And as regrettable as it is, that's really the only thing we can do is to associate the cost with it. When I've heard students in college and myself, when we're paying for the class, we're much more apt to pay attention and excel in it. And with public schools, are obviously funded through taxes.
Right. And
that cost is largely invisible to parents. It is a cost, but it's just part of the taxes. They don't really notice it. If they were actually paying some amount for their students to go to school, I think they would be much more willing to push their student to succeed. Otherwise, they're wasting their money, and very few people like to waste that money.
Sure. So if it were, I'm just curious as to how you would have that work. Would you have them still pay the same amount in taxes, but maybe pay that directly to the school rather than sending it to the state, which then allocates it, or how would you have that work?
Well, without getting too much into politics,
sure.
I think it should be privatized completely. So obviously they would
so you would have the schools not be public anymore, but have them run. Okay.
And for those that can't afford it, all foundations that do work for education today, and I imagine they would work even more so in the future, like the Bill and Gates Foundation. Billions of dollars. They help with health in Africa, and they do help with education. And if it were privatized, I am sure they would greatly step up their efforts to help those that are unable to afford education and provide some base for it.
Okay. Any other thoughts about how we involve? Yeah.
This is not directly related,
Sure.
but it seems like it used to be that families were a lot more like held the student responsible, and was if the student was having trouble, it was like, okay, we need to work together, and you need to pay more attention in class. And these days, it seems like there's a shift. A student does bad now, parents get mad at the teacher, and parents go, oh, you're doing something wrong.
Sure.
And I feel like that's a really bad approach. I feel like there's nothing we can really do about that, because that was just like a general shift, and I don't know what you want to call that. But.
Right. And that's definitely not the first time I've heard that in one of these conversations. And I think it's something that people have observed a lot. And it seems to be kind of a hindrance to family involvement in students learning.
I'm just curious, did anybody see the movie Regeneration? Did anybody go to that? Okay, were you there last night or last week?
Yeah, one day.
You know how they talked about in there the me generation, and how, I was going to comment on that a little bit earlier when you were talking about not making your kids take courses that they don't think they'll ever use, because my kids do not think they will ever use algebra, ever. And maybe they won't, I don't know. But as a parent, I think that there are some things that they need to do whether they want to or not, because as an adult, you have responsibilities, and you're not going to like many of them, but it's a fact of life. So, I don't want them to always be able to do what they want to do.
Sure.
They need to, a lot of times, do what they have to do, whether they want to or not. And even when they don't want to, sometimes that's good for them too. So, I don't know if that kind of goes along. Yeah.
Sure. There are values that I think a lot of times, students learn from in education as well. Values like responsibility, and I think that's one of those things that kind of has traditionally gone along with K-12 education. Any other thoughts on this?
I think family involvement is kind of like a dangerous thing, to be honest, because kids lie, number one, so they're gonna blame things on things that aren't really actually happening, and so then the parents get all like excited about it and all that whole scenario. And then also, I don't know, I have 3 younger siblings, and so a lot of times they come home with homework that they can't really do on their own, and so either me or my parents will help them and do the majority of the homework. So I think in that case, they're just kind of getting off easy because they're encouraging more family involvement at home. So I think less learning is actually happening.
That's the wrong kind of family involvement, though. You shouldn't just be doing the work. You should be explaining to them how to do the work.
Right, but like, if like...
That's on the families end of
it's hard to
the
say,
wrong
that's what
doing.
you want to say, but when your kid comes home and like is struggling with an assignment and it's like due that week, and you know what I mean? So
Right. It's
you can only guide them so much, and then you just...
I think there's a rule that you should never teach family members. Like, I feel like my mom taught me like when I was young, but as I got older, I feel like there should be the third person that should be teaching and helping out, not the family member.
Sure.
It's family, so it's not really
Sure.
forced down or.
It's harder to,
It's harder.
there's a relationship that you have with a family member that I think you're saying can be a hindrance to students learning sometimes. So I saw a bunch of hands, and I want to make sure I get to all of them. So here, and then here. I'll start here, and I'll work my way around.
Right. Jumping what off what he said, a lot of schools are implementing like online grade systems now, so that parents can go and look up their student's grade and hold their student accountable for it. But a lot of times there's a lot of like errors with those, and so then you have the parent like barking at the kid like, why haven't you done this assignment, when really they turned in 3 weeks ago and the teacher just hasn't uploaded it yet.
So the tool is only as good as what the educator uploads.
Yeah, so in that case, like family involvement is kind of a bad thing,
Sure.
because the family doesn't know what's going on in the classroom, the kid doesn't know sometimes because they haven't gotten the assignment back yet.
Okay.
So they don't know whether the teacher actually graded it or if they lost it or what happened.
So those tools could involve families, but it could be in, if it's not being used to its full extent, it could actually be a or it can cause problems, in the relationship between students and parents.
Yeah, and then going off of the community and business groups thing, I had to take a careers class in 8th grade, and I already knew what I wanted to do at that point. And this class was like, go online and take a personality quiz, and then we're just going to talk about, like, here's a list of careers you could go into, and it was completely irrelevant. So I think if you were to do, like, careers classes where you go into the community and visit different places where, like, you see what people are actually doing, it would be more relevant to students, and then it would encourage them to be more involved and take electives that are relevant to what they want to do.
Definitely give students some hands-on experiences. That'll really, help them better understand what they might want to do than just taking a quiz. You're in the back. I saw you. Did you have your hand up earlier? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did. I was just talking about how, I was just commenting on here. Yeah, I think that's why families should involve more on, like, motivations and students' motivations, and even like kids' lives. He says kids' life, but they should be more involved on about their morality, like ethics and motivation. That kind of mental part, I think family should be more involved.
Okay.
And then the teachers or the schools actually should have big, good community and then communications between teachers and parents, and they should maybe encourage more on that part, because that's something that teachers cannot really touch, because if students are not motivated, like you said, nobody cares, and then also parents don't want to be blamed at their education, so there's a tendency that teachers are blamed, and then kids are just not interested, and then it's just going worse. So
Definitely.
yeah, I think that part is probably important for families.
Sure, definitely. So, keeping the responsibility for kind of values and ethical development, moral development for students with the family, but having good communication between teachers and parents can, build a good relationship.
Right.
I know I see there are 3 more hands, and we do have one more topic I want to get to. I saw your hand at the very beginning, so I'm going to take your last comment, and if we have time at the end, I'm going to come back to your 2 hands, but I just want to make sure we get to all of our topics.
Family involvement is something different, like actually bringing, the family inside the school. Like at my son's school, they have each month a parent volunteer and come read to the class or something like that.
Sure.
There's different things that we do, as parents, they have a movie night, where you can have your whole family come up to the school and watch TV. So as far as family involvement, you should, do more things where you can bring the whole family, because you might not just have one kid in elementary.
Definitely.
You might have multiple kids, and you need to bring everybody together. And as far as community business, growing up in high school, I was at the rec centers and stuff like that, and places around the school. There was different programs and things going on at the school that I could participate in. Stuff that we had a requirement that we had to do volunteer hours and stuff like that. So either way it went, we had community involvement.
Definitely.
In the school.
And it sounds like that's something that was valuable for you when you were growing up.
Right.
So it's something that should be offered. And like you said, kind of getting the whole family into the school. It doesn't necessarily, there can be whole events for the whole family that maybe aren't always super academic focused, but it makes the school feel like a welcoming
Right,
place.
because they have fun day, movie day, bring wear your pajamas to school day, and stuff like that.
Very
All types of involvement.
Definitely. And I know you 2 had your hands up, and I'm sorry, I apologize. If you've got something to say on this next one, I'll come to you first. So our 5th discussion is around how we invest in education, which we've talked about money issues a little bit so far tonight. So I want to point out to you on pages 16 and 17 of that issue guide you have in front of you, there's some charts and diagrams that just outline how the state of Michigan invests its tax revenue that it receives from those who are working in the state of Michigan. So a few things I want to highlight for you there. Michigan's K-12 education system is our largest funding priority in the state. So 41% of our tax dollars that state receives go toward the K-12 education system, making it our largest funding priority. However, we do still spend a lot of money on education, but we spend less than we used to. You can see at that line graph at the bottom of page 16 that we've been spending about $1 billion less every year on K-12 education since 2003. So for almost a decade now, we still have been investing heavily in K-12 education, but we've been investing less than we used to. You can see how that reflects in our state ranking and how we fund education at the top of page 16. On page 17, there's a breakdown there of how our monies are spent in the education system. So that 41% of our tax dollars that go through to K-12 education, you can see how that's broken down, where the dollars go. So take a moment to look that over. One other thing I want to highlight for you, on page 16, there's that pie chart in the middle. You can see that 41% of tax revenue goes towards K-12 education. You can see where the remaining 59% is allocated as well, so which other programs your tax revenue supports. So take a moment, just look over those figures, see what stands out to you. And I'm just going to put up your first clicker question just so you have a frame of reference. So this question is it has a very business kind of language to it, a business focus. But I want to get your thoughts here as a taxpayer. So if you've ever worked in Michigan before, then you have paid taxes to the state of Michigan. So as a taxpayer, do you feel that the current Michigan public education system offers you a good return on your investment? So if you think if the state is spending 41% of all the tax revenue on education, if you think for those dollars you're getting a good return, a good product from the school system, you'd be more on this agree side, the strongly agree. If you think for the money that we spend, we aren't getting as good of a product as you'd like to see from the school system, you'd be more on this disagree at the 4 to 5. So take a moment, think that over, and whenever you're ready, just enter your response.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
What is leading education in our country? Do you know what it means?
I don't know like the top 5. I know Massachusetts is up there in education as far as test results.
Do you know if their revenue is alone?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, we're right in the middle of the pack as far as how we spend on education. We're 24th in the nation in how we spend. So there's 23 other states that spend more than we do. Yep. So we used to be about 12 in how we spend on education. Any last second voters out there? Okay, let's see what you said about this one. So here, 36% of you agree that for the money we pay in as a state, we're getting a good return on our investment. 27% of you are on the fence. You neither agree nor disagree. You're not sure. 27% of you disagree that you're getting a good product. 9% of you strongly disagree. And as a follow-up question to that, do you think the state of Michigan needs to spend more money to improve student success? And 1 here is yes, and 2 is no. Looks like we're missing a voter. Anyone else want to weigh in on this one? All right. Wow, almost 50-50. 58% of you say yes, 42% of you say no as far as spending more money. So, could we spend differently as a state and improve student success? And if so, what would your priorities be?
I know there are many factors exactly that go into how the money is spent, and I don't have the source off the top of my head, but from what I've seen, spending overall in the nation has increased 400%, I think, since the 1970s, while achievement has remained flat.
Okay,
We
for
have been
education.
throwing more and more money into the problem, but we're getting no gains from it. And it seems that there is a base cost associated with paying the teachers.
Sure.
And beyond that, if the teacher is truly passionate about the subject and he or she knows what she's talking about, she can teach the student just sitting outside in the field. You don't need all these tools to impart education. It's just, you just need the teacher, to me, is the most important part of it. If you have a great teacher, just throwing more money to the problem won't really increase achievement.
Okay, so for you, more money isn't needed. We already spend a lot on education, and we really should just focus on instructional costs. So paying teachers, that's where the...
Hire more teachers and increase funding for more teachers, but
Okay.
beyond that, I wouldn't spend much more.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I know that he got paid like a ridiculous amount of money, and I don't know, I never even saw the guy before, so like I think like on paper it looks like they don't get paid as much as everyone else, but there's less of them, so they're really getting paid like way too much compared to everyone else.
Okay, so at the administrative level, you might look for some efficiencies there, maybe not paying quite as much. Okay. Any other thoughts on how you might spend differently if you were in charge of the purse strings here in Michigan? I know it's a tough question. This is a hard one. I think that's why we struggle with it every year.
I just agree that we don't need to be pumping money into new technologies. People have learned fine for a very long time without all these fancy things. The money should be going towards teachers' salaries. They're already underpaid, and their salaries are getting cut constantly. So it's
Okay, you'd invest more in teacher salaries, less on technology and other sorts of resources.
It's not necessary.
Okay.
More generally, obviously the state only has a finite amount of money. And to spend more on education, you need to raise taxes and cut from other things.
Right.
And in the end, you pay in taxes. And what you pay in taxes, you can't spend yourself, and it depresses the economy in other areas, it's all very complex, of course. But it seems to me that if you let the parents decide how to spend the money and to choose what they want to teach their kid, how they want it taught, they could perhaps better allocate funds than a bureaucrat in Lansing or Washington, because they're closer to it.
Sure.
They can choose to teach their kid math, because that's all they can afford. They can teach their kid math for a year and then move on to a different topic, what they can afford, instead of trying to just, like I said earlier, give the same general education to everyone. Trying to let parents customize and tailor it with their own money.
Sure. So giving the individual kind of more freedom to think about what their child would be. All right. These are taking one last comment.
Well, that's pressure.
Yeah.
I've always thought that because of the way our education system is funded, that there's always a difference between cities, right? If you have, like Bloomfield is, like at one point was number 4th in the country, one of the richest cities in the country, so the education system is going to have a surplus of money to do a lot of things with. Whereas in Detroit you have, or in Flint or Saginaw, Pontiac, some of these poor areas, they don't have the economic base. So it limits and restricts a lot of funding, right? And that could have a lot to do with teachers you hire, material to present, textbooks in the class. And so it's always a very complicated issue, because I call myself a demo Republican, because there is a blend that you have to find. You have to really stay in the center, But I think the idea is to find a way to shift dollars where there can be quality education everywhere, not just concentrated in certain areas.
Sure.
And the question is, how do you do that? And I'm one to say that I don't have all the answers, but I think it would be a great conversation. How to shift dollars in terms of education.
Sure. So that everyone has kind of an equitable opportunity at a
Yes. And
education.
It's not an easy answer.
No.
It's a difficult question, but at least if it was on the table, it could be discussed.
Absolutely. And that's actually something, I've heard a lot in these conversations, that, the way we fund our schools, sometimes it sets up these kind of, there's discrepancies in the way we fund our school districts. So some that have talked about that in these conversations. So I know we're coming up upon 8 o'clock, so I do have one final question for you. But before we get to it, really briefly, I want to ask you a few questions about you. So I mentioned at the beginning tonight, we're going to talk to 5,000 people this year, and we're working extremely hard to make sure those 5,000 people represent the state's population. So if you would be so kind as to answer a couple questions with your clickers about you, no graphs for these, very quick, like all other questions tonight, totally anonymous. My first question for you is, which best describes you? And I know for many of you, you probably are more than one of these would fit you. So if you could choose either the one you most identify with or the one that most influences the way you think about education. All right. Looking at the map on the screen, if you could click the number for the region where you live, we're currently in Region 7. And if anyone doesn't live in Region 7 or you don't think you do, I'd be happy to help you out. You're not sure. Anybody else out there? All right. What is your age? What is your gender? What is your race? What is your household size? So how many people do you live with, including you, most of the year? And then finally, what is your household income? And if you don't know, you can either guess or choose not to answer. And if you support yourself, even if you live with your parents, I would say just include your own income. Thank you guys so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. So my very last question for you before you are out the door tonight. We've talked a lot about things that are challenges for our school districts, maybe things that aren't going as well as we wish they were. I also know that you're all here as students, and many of you have obviously are very proud of your children that you have in the K-12 education system. So I'm interested to know what's going on in your community that's helping students succeed. Maybe a great teacher or a program that you'd love to brag about a little bit. Does anyone have a success story about something that's helping kids learn at the K-12 level?
Yeah. Since my son is in our school system, we have a lot of interaction with youth with him.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that come there and volunteer and stuff like that, they kind of like promote. They promote a lot of things there, like higher education.
Sure.
So the students there are kind of like Michigan fans, so everyone has like just kind of go to Michigan and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a good camaraderie.
Sure, definitely. Students kind of have lots of goals educationally for themselves from an early age because they're exposed to that.
Right.
Okay. Any other stories anyone wants to
My
share?
daughter participated with OTEC, which is Southeastern Technical Campus Center.
Okay.
She's a junior in high school, and she's taking graphic arts classes now.
Very cool.
Absolutely cool experience. I mean, she goes into a classroom with 30 Apple computers, the most current Adobe Photoshop, CS4, Dreamweaver applications you could ever imagine. So it's just a huge investment in that, and she absolutely gravitates towards it.
That's
It's a
really
cool experience for her.
Absolutely.
And it's also linked her here to, well, I linked her to LTU, but then when she saw some of the things that LTU is doing, it just kind of reaffirmed that it's a good direction for her.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing. Any other stories anyone wants to add before we close?
I want to speak about how important I think it is teachers who have a passion for teaching. So I have 3 children, and the oldest is 23 and the youngest is 12, and they all 3 went through the same school system, and they all 3 had 3 teachers who all 3 said, Ms. Morgan is awesome. Mr. Maxfield is the best teacher ever. I mean, these same 3 teachers, and these 3 kids are as different as you and I, 3 kids, they're completely different. So it's not about the child's personality or what the child is interested in, or even the subject. It's just that the teacher's fantastic. And, they're just really passionate. So I think it's really, really important.
Absolutely. Those are really good notes to end on, so thank you for sharing those. And before you leave tonight, and I know that Professor Mercier probably has some things she needs to tell you about, I just want to tell you a few things about what you have in front of you there. So that issue guide is yours to keep with the apple on the cover. What you have inside of it are a few forms. There's one that says the future of education in Michigan on it. If you have a moment to fill that out, I'd really appreciate it. If you need a pen, I've got one. If you include your email address, we're going to, when we have our final report ready from these conversations in January, we're going to send it out to everyone who participated along the way. So if you're interested in receiving it, I definitely recommend that you fill that out so we can get it to you right away so you can see how your voice kind of fit into the statewide picture. So definitely fill that out. Also on there are a few yes or no questions at the bottom. If you're interested in putting together one of these conversations, maybe bringing a group of 15 to 20 people together to talk about these issues, circle yes that you're interested in hosting. I'll get in contact with you and let you know what that means. Also, you can sign up for free to a publication we have called Bridge Magazine. It comes out twice a week. It comes to your email. It's investigative journalism about things happening in Michigan communities. I definitely recommend you check it out. We can get you signed up, and if you like it, you can keep receiving it. Also, there's an evaluation form. If you have any comments about how I can do better as a facilitator or ways that we can make this presentation better, go ahead and fill that out and leave that for me. And then third, there's a form that says what's working in your community. If you've got a good story you didn't get a chance to share or didn't feel comfortable sharing, you can fill that out and leave it for me, or send it to me. My email address is at the bottom. And then finally, there's some resource there about volunteer opportunities. I know you're all leaders. You're in a leadership class here, so you're probably very involved already, but if you're looking for more volunteer opportunities, you can go to our website. There's instructions on there about how to do that. It's centerformichigan.net, and there's a tool there that you can search by zip code for volunteer opportunities in your area. So that's all I've got for you. When you've got those forms filled out, if you could just leave it on kind of the front row of desks here on your way out. Please also leave your clickers. I'll be in huge trouble if I don't come back with those. So that's all I have for you, and I'll turn it over to Professor Mercier.
Okay. Thank you guys for coming. I wanted to just comment, Amber, you're so young and you do such a fabulous job at facilitating. I'm really impressed. I like how you recap what the students said. And I want to thank you guys for participating because this was awesome.
It really
group.
was.
I mean, I love to hear your opinions and you know, you had some disagreements in opinions and you weren't afraid to say that, so I really like that. I wanted to point out, the other thing that's really kind of cool is we dabbled in some political issues and the debate's on tonight.
Absolutely.
So
Everyone
if you're
go home, check
voting,
it out.
everybody run home and watch the debate.
Amen.
9 to 10:30, and it should be on every major network, and it streams online. Check it out. I know I'm going to listen to it on the radio on my way home.
Right,
So,
right. Be sure to sign in because that is, you know, my proof that you were at this event. Even though I met you, I have a lot of students, so I may not remember. And cookies and drinks, take them with you, or you know, one for your roommates or whatever. So thank you guys for coming, and I'll watch for your papers.